Well, thank you guys for having me this afternoon. And once again, my name is George Nickel. I'm with the SEWP program office. So I'm here to go over the SEWP tools and how SCRM or supply chain is built into them, or the relationships so that customers can see the supply chain relationships with the OEMs or providers, as we call them at SEWP. So the first tool that is available for customers, or the main tool that is available for customers, is what we call our SEWP quote request tool. And that's how customers issue their requirements, or RFQs, or RFIs, MRRs, agency catalogs. And that's how they issue them to the contract holders. Then they get their quotes back and review, and then make an award based on the quotes they receive. So the first thing a customer must do is they must log into the SEWP quote request tool. You have to register, of course. You're required to have a government email address. We save that information strictly to allow you to access the tools and keep track of internally your orders and RFQs that go through our system. We don't share that information outside of our system with anyone. So once you've registered and you logged in, under the request section, you'll go to create new request, and that's how you'll begin to issue your requirement. So you'll go through that process, you'll start there, you'll issue that requirement, and then from there, after you've scrolled, or you've uploaded your requirements, you've done your fair opportunity selection, you'll scroll down to what we call our verified options. And this is where supply chain comes into play. So the first thing you can do, as you can see on the radio button, our system actually defaults to automatically require that all contract holders who respond to your request be authorized resellers. We make it the default selection because we want customers to make that conscious decision to uncheck and allow for non-authorized resellers, so they know that they're accepting additional risk by going outside of that supply chain. So that's why we default to the yes. And then underneath that, we have what we call our EARP, or Established Authorized Reseller Program. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that means on the next slide. But we've identified a set of providers that there's some additional risks or concerns with going outside of their supply chain. And then under that, you have the ability to identify specific providers or your brand name providers you would like to include in your requirement. So you can type in Adobe, Dell, and it'll pull the provider information down from our database, and it'll automatically check to ensure that the claims on the quote from the contract holder are from those providers you are requesting. So what is the EARP program? So as I mentioned before, SEWP has reviewed a set of providers that we've noticed over the years. Of course, this has been developed over 10 plus years, that going outside of their supply chain presents additional risk to the government, and staying within their supply chain or selecting from their authorized resellers provides additional benefit to the government. So there are 4 criteria that they must meet. As you can see, the 4 listed there, the one I just mentioned. They must have a program which they clearly designate authorized resellers. There's a documented process for those companies to follow to become authorized resellers, and they have a clear point of contact to manage their federal sales program. We keep that point of contact on file for all of the providers you see listed here. So all 17, I believe it's 17 companies, we have points of contact for each individual one of those. And as they change, we keep that information up to date. So these are the EARP providers. So the biggest thing about these providers is if you as a customer have selected any one of these providers or selected this requirement, that the contract holder must be an authorized reseller. For the providers in this requirement, we don't allow them to quote, just simply provide you a verified quote, simply because we've noticed the consequence or the additional risk of going outside of that supply chain with these particular providers. So then once the contract holder or customer has made their authorized reseller requirements known within their RFQ, that RFQ is then sent to the contract holders you solicited. And the contract holders then have access to what we call the contract holder only page, or CHOP. And on that CHOP, that's how they perform their day-to-day actions, whether it be updating orders, providing quotes to requirements, or updating their supply chain relationships. So what they have to do is they log into what we call the CHOP, and then they go to our provider tool. Our provider tool provides them a host of different functions they can perform. But the main one, of course, is requesting new providers to be added to our database, and then updating their supply chain relationships with said providers. So what does that page look like? So this is how they indicate that they're an authorized reseller for that particular provider. So they'll select the provider, and then they have the options you see here. The first, of course, is being an authorized reseller, or approved reseller is often an interchangeable term with that as well. And essentially what a fully authorized reseller means is that the contract holder is authorized by that OEM to provide their full suite of products and services. Below that is considered a subset reseller. And what a subset reseller is they're authorized to sell a particular subset of products from that provider. So for example, with Microsoft, it could be they're authorized to sell O365, but not authorized for the services, for the Surface, the Microsoft Surface. So underneath that, with the subset reseller, you see that product line field. They have to add or indicate the product line they're authorized for, or the process won't work. There's an additional process they must follow on our TRs, our technology refreshes, to indicate that they're authorized this product as part of that particular product line that they're authorized for. So they'll do that on the TR process or technology refresh. And then underneath that is the point of contact they must provide at that provider. So we verify that the email of the individual does in fact belong to that provider, is from that provider, the domain name checks out, that kind of thing, and the contact information is correct. And then they'll receive an email when that is submitted. So one of the things to highlight here is, what do we consider authorized in terms of SEWP? Essentially, that means that the OEM or provider considers sale of products through this particular contract holder, regardless of how they source them, to be considered legitimate. So it could be a tiered approach, or they could be working through a distributor. As long as the OEM is aware of who the contract holder is and considers sale of those products through this particular contract holder to be legitimate, we consider them authorized for either the fully authorized or subset. And then there's another opportunity, what we call the one-off. And the one-off gives the contract holder the opportunity to be authorized specifically for an RFQ for a specific agency or specific organization within the agency. So with the one-off situation, specifically for the RFQ, the contract holder then indicates in that line just below, or in the field just below, they'll indicate the RFQ number that this request is associated with. And we'll pull down the subject information from that particular requirement, so that when the information is sent out to the provider, they know particularly what this requirement is for. If the contract holder is not solicited for this particular requirement that they indicate this RFQ, they'll get an error message letting them know that they weren't solicited for that particular RFQ. Then they can solicit or select an external request. That means they're using a system other than ours or the customer's using a system other than ours to solicit this particular requirement. But we can keep track of that as long as there's additional information provided. Should you have that information, we can look it up. Then the other type of one-off is an agency one-off. So essentially the contract holder can be authorized for an entire agency. So they can be authorized for all of NASA, or all of DOD, or all of the VA, that kind of situation. Or the next option is to be authorized for a particular organization within an agency. So that would be either, for example, with NASA, they can be authorized only for Goddard and not Kennedy or Johnson, or within the DOD, they can be authorized for only DISA and not the entire DOD. So that type of situation is also available there. One of the key things here, though, is our contract holders should be communicating with their provider partners prior to submitting those relationships, so that the provider is aware. Because as part of this process, for any relationship that is indicated, we send an email off to the provider. And that provider receives an email for for the fully authorized and the subset relationships. If they agree with the email, there's no action for the provider to take. If they deny that relationship or believe that relationship is incorrect, they can send us an email. We'll either remove or update the relationship, or get in contact with the contract holder to have them update that relationship through the CHOP tool again. For the one-off, there's some action for the provider to take. That email sends a link to either affirm or deny that one-off relationship. So until the provider affirms that relationship, the contract holder cannot quote as an authorized reseller for that particular RFQ, to that particular agency, or to that particular organization within an agency. So it's very important.
George, may I interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
I'm sorry to do so, but there's a question that came in that I fear would be hard to peg it to if we waited till the end. And an audience member is asking that if the CH selects none, can they still continue adding the provider?
So our relationships automatically default to none. The contract holder has to go in and update the relationship. Okay. However, you can add the products to your contract. However, you cannot quote a requirement unless you cannot quote a requirement if the customer has requested authorized resellers, or you should not unless you're an authorized reseller.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interject.
No problem. So then, again, with the one-off relationship email, the provider must approve or deny that relationship. Those links are good for 7 days. It's always important that our contract holders reach out to their providers prior to, so they know that the email is coming. So those emails don't wait too long, because oftentimes what will happen is RFQ will close and the contract holder hasn't received a response back from the provider. So you want to make sure that they're aware that the email is coming so they can take action. For our established authorized reseller providers, or EARP providers, we have a point of contact on file that is automatically populated in our system with that for the contract holders to use. So they don't have to edit that, or they can't edit it rather. It's there. So once the contract holder submits the email or submits the relationship, the provider receives an email. And with that email, we'll let them know about the relationship, but we'll also let them know they have access to what we call the provider-only page, or PROP. And what that PROP page does, you can only be granted access by the SEWP PMO. But what it does, it gives you access, or the provider access, to see all the companies that have currently listed themselves as authorized resellers or subset resellers for that particular provider. So when they log in, of course, after we've given them access and they've logged in, they'll see a list of all their current authorized reseller relationships and any subset relationships they have. So they can edit them or provide more information or let us know who is and who isn't current, and provide an updated list. So that all that information is there for them. They can also update their subset information and let us know, so that we, the SEWP PMO, as well as the providers, all have accurate information as to what they consider their subset. And then from there, they can also review their one-off relationships. So if they had any pending for review, they would show up on this page, and all the ones they've currently authorized would show up on this page. So these contract holders, you see, they have three. This provider essentially has authorized 3 particular one-offs, and they have none pending. And if they had any pending, it would show up here. So once the contract holders and providers have performed their work, the contract holder has then provided a quote. The customer then goes back to the quote request tool and reviews the quotes they receive. So what they'll do is they'll log in, of course, or go back to review their requirements, their RFQ. And under that quote section, you see for this particular request, we've received 3 quotes. So what we would then do is click on that 3, and it would take us to our quotes results page. And you'll see 3 tabs. The first tab indicates all quotes that meet all verified options. The second tab means any additional quotes you received that didn't meet all verified options. And then the third tab shows you all other contract holders you solicited and any additional messages they may have provided you in regards to your requirement. So for this particular RFQ, and this is the demo, of course, we received 3 quotes. We're going to review the first quote. Along with the quote, the contract holder is required to provide a verification file. So we click on that verification file, and it provides us information on the CLINs that were provided on that particular RFQ. So when we open that, this is what we see. We see the CLIN information, of course, the CLIN, the description of what that particular CLIN was, the part number, so that's the OEM part number, the manufacturer part number, the actual provider for that particular CLIN. The status is listed as valid. Valid essentially just means it's on contract and properly priced. If it didn't meet the valid requirement, you wouldn't see it at all. The quote wouldn't show up because the CLIN wouldn't be on contract and properly priced. Then you have the pricing information. And then you have some additional information that we verified. TAA, Energy Star, EPEAT, and on that final column you see is the supply chain information. So for this particular RFQ, we didn't have an authorized reseller requirement. So if you didn't have a relationship, you could quote it and there would be no, you meet all the requirements if you were a contract holder. Below down, you see the legend that has the symbols for all our supply chain designations. M essentially means the contract holder is the manufacturer. They're the ones who actually make the product and provide this or provide the service. Under that is A for authorized. That essentially means the contract holder is known by the OEM. regardless if they're a subset reseller, one-off reseller, or a fully authorized. That lets the customer know that for this particular requirement, this contract holder is authorized to sell these particular claims or these particular products for them. And then under that, you have N, which stands for no relationship and is the default until the contract holder goes in and updates that relationship. So the key thing here, though, is contract holders must update their relationships prior to providing quotes, because our system checks on a nightly basis. So before you quote, contract holders should be making sure that they've addressed all their supply chain relationships before our system updates. So, and then from there, if the quote met all your requirements, the customers could essentially award this particular requirement. So from there, we have a couple of other things I want to highlight. I know cloud is a big push. There's a big push for the federal government in the cloud space. We have a FedRAMP page that is dedicated to providing FedRAMP certified products or information on FedRAMP certified products. So what we do is daily, we check the FedRAMP page and we pull it down and populate our page. And that shows currently all the products that are FedRAMP certified, the provider, the service model, impact level, status, and the agency authorizations for that particular product. That final column you don't see unless you're logged into our system as a customer. And what that is, it'll show you currently which contract holders currently have an authorized reseller one. The contract holder must be an authorized reseller to be listed in this column, but it'll show you which contract holders currently carry these products on their contract. So if you're a customer kind of doing your market research or beginning the stages of your cloud solution requirement, you want to know which contract holders currently carry it, you can go to this FedRAMP page, log in, and that final column will populate, and it'll show you which contract holders carry those products, so that when you go to do your requirement in the quote request tool, you'll know I should solicit this contract holders group or set aside because I know there are contract holders in this group that provide that requirement or provide those claims. And then from there, we also have a page dedicated to the ISO 20243 page. That's the supply chain standard that we've worked on with the open group on. So there's information on what that is, the self-certification and third-party certification process. There's some videos dedicated to it. We have listed on that page also all our contract holders who are currently ISO certified. I believe Al mentioned there's somewhere around 60 contract holders currently certified, and you can go look at that page to see who's currently certified. You can also list that in your requirement of your RFQ. So that's also available to you. So that's kind of some of the tools we have centered around supply chain. Our provider tool, our public provider tool also shows supply chain relationships, but I didn't want to get into too much of that here, but these are kind of the more functional tools that help you work through your requirements. So we have some other resources that are available to you, mainly training videos centered around specific supply chain topics. So you can watch a video on our QRT or quote request tool that has information on how to, one, select the authorized resellers or select the authorized reseller requirement for your requests. Some information on Section 889. There's a video on the EARP program and videos on FedRAMP and the ISO 20243 certification. So we encourage you to view those videos. The QRT video, I believe, is about 10 to 15 minutes, but all the other videos are under 4 minutes to keep that short attention span, keep you with that short attention span. With that being said, do we have any questions from the floor?
We absolutely do, and thank you very much. One question is, you were just talking about videos about some of the ISO standards. Does the SEWP site show multiple ISO standards when appropriate, like 9001 and 2701, in addition to the 20243?
Yeah, currently we only show the 20243 standard because that's the one we're focused on, and that strictly focuses on supply chain.
Very good. Okay. And then sort of a bigger picture question, but you were showing these tools that both the vendors and the government customers can use to their advantage to really start to bake more supply chain considerations into the process. Are the vendors taking full advantage of those tools yet, or is that still kind of an education process?
For our contract holders, it's pretty live and active. They've been using it since the beginning of SEWP. There have been some iterations of it as we've gone through. You've heard Often happy, never satisfied. We've
Yep.
made some considerable changes to the process, specifically with that one-off process. That wasn't alive or at the beginning of SEWP. And about 2 or 3 years ago is when we implemented that. And as the rules change, I've heard before, in an earlier presentation, rules before tools. So as the rules change, we make updates to our tools to accommodate those rules.
Very good. But the buy-in is pretty widespread.
Correct. Yeah, and our provider-only page was launched just about, I believe, at the beginning of 2019, 2020. And we're getting some traction there. We have some developments coming for that and some enhancements that go along with that page.
And what about your buyers? If there was a place you were going to sort of evangelize and encourage people to really start to leverage certain aspects of this more, is there a particular tool that you feel is not getting the love it should?
That I don't have. I think all of our tools are being used kind of evenly. The verified options piece was that section we showed of the tool was launched actually last year. So we're trying to put more emphasis on that and show that or evangelize that piece of the quote request tool a little bit more. So for customers, if it's working for you, let us know what you would like to see there. Definitely provide us that feedback. We try to update all of our tools, not just our supply chain tools, on a weekly basis. So definitely provide us that information.
Sure. And in a couple of the earlier presentations, Darlene especially mentioned this about needing to make adjustments as new policies come down the pipe. There was a pretty substantial executive order on supply chain that came out in February, and some reporting that different agencies had to do over the summer in response to that. Have there been any changes to how SEWP approaches supply chain that were sparked by that executive order?
I'm not familiar with this particular executive order. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. I mean, I know there's sort of constant iteration. I just didn't know if there'd been any kind of big outside pressures of late to revise and extend the toolkit. And then this is another one that is a little, maybe a little premature because CMMC is not fully baked at this point. But is there anything on the SEWP roadmap for bringing in CMMC certification status the way you've started to do with FedRAMP?
So CMMC is definitely on our radar. We've been monitoring that situation pretty closely. We have some recommendations to update our tools, but we have not implemented them yet. And we're still kind of watching as things develop. But we did do a presentation to our contract holders at our last PM meeting to kind of discuss where that would go or where that could go and what the possible effects are for us as a program and what that would look like for our tools.
Okay. And then last question is, is there a sticking point that you run into with your customers? Is there, right now we've got the question slide up. Is there one question that you and your colleagues get from the SEWP customers about how to take advantage of these SCRM tools that you'd want to kind of, repeat and foot stomp here?
So let me just rephrase that. So a question from our customers that they get?
Yeah, or a question from your customers to you of how to use the SEWP tools.
I think the biggest thing is understanding the relationships between the providers and the contract holders. And I think one of their biggest questions, or I guess it's a piece of advice we often give, we understand requirements are unique for each agency, but lumping requirements together where there are a lot of providers, that may be a little difficult for some of our contract holders to respond to. That's some of the feedback we've gotten. We don't discourage you from doing that, but we encourage you to take all of that into consideration when you're soliciting the requirements via the quote request tool.
Very good. And I know we're going to share these slides, but the learning resources that you called out there, those are readily accessible from the homepage of the SEWP site? Very good.
Correct. If you go to the website, www.sewp.nasa.gov, on the left-hand section, we have what we call our fast access section. And under that, you'll see training videos. And that has a list of all the training videos I've listed there, plus a few more.
Very good. Excellent. Well, George Nicol, thanks very much for that run through. As I said at the beginning, everyone's interested in this challenge. And I think your presentation on how to actually start to take the tools and apply them is super helpful for today.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.